So today I'm going to be speaking with Mendel Weinberger on his upcoming four-part workshop in training mindfulness skills to men, geared towards religious men with the Orthodox Jewish background. Originally, Mendel graduated from Fordham University with a degree in communication and media studies, and went on to become a mindfulness trainer, uh, at which point later also became a life coach. He works with men from all different backgrounds, not just in trying to organize their lives in a pragmatic way using coaching, but also trying to imbue that work with a spiritual flavor, and trying to dive for meaning using mindfulness as one technique in developing a deeper sense of self in the world. So, Mendel, thanks so much for sitting with me and talking today. How you doing?
Thank you for having me. I'm doing great.
Is this the first sort of interview you've done like this before? This sort of long version interview?
Yeah, and I'm very grateful to be doing this because I think it's really important that people know that mindfulness is something that can be used by religious Jews to deepen their spirituality, to improve their mental health, and all areas of their life.
Mhm, mhm. How did you originally get into mindfulness? I mean, it's a jump from, I mean, it's not such a huge jump from communication and media. Well, I guess in some sense it is, but I mean, how did you make that jump from what you were studying in university to what you're doing today?
Well, I in my undergraduate, in addition to the classes in communications, I was always interested in spirituality, and I took
Mm,
a class in actually Eastern religion.
mm,
And part of the class was, besides reading about, it was mainly for, from the religions of the East, India and China and Japan and Thailand, which is mainly Hinduism and Buddhism.
mm,
So I was very taken with Buddhism, especially, and the practice of meditation. So after I graduated from university, I did pursue that interest, um, and learned how to meditate. It was in the context of the Buddhist religion,
mm,
which for all the benefits that I got from meditation were tremendous, but I felt uncomfortable with the religious aspects of the statues and the bowing and kind of the rituals. Um, so I left that and I
mm,
pursued my interest in Judaism because I am a Jew, and so I didn't actually pursue meditation for many years. I was
mm,
just learning and learning about Judaism and Torah and living a Jewish life. But some years later, I started to feel some disconnect that as much as I loved the learning of Torah and keeping mitzvot, but there was some kind of a lack in my personal connection
hmm,
to Hashem, and so I decided to sort of look back into it and start to study sources in the Torah. And one of my main sources was Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan Zatzal, who
sure.
in the 19, I think, 80s wrote a book about Jewish meditation and sort of shared some of what he found, and gave some practices which are not so easy, but at least I found that there is such a thing. And according to him, uh, before the destruction of the temple, there were prophecy schools. Now we don't know exactly what they were practicing, but according to him, they were doing some kind of meditation that would bring to levels of prophecy.
Mm,
With the destruction of the temple um, and the diaspora, the Jews being spread out into the diaspora, the rabbis decided that this wouldn't be a good idea because of the practices of the Goyim, which
hmm,
are similar, and they felt that Jews would be pulled into those practices, and so they basically any kind of meditative practices were only practiced by special people who
hmm,
were maybe had their own tradition, but it wasn't widely known. That's why you don't really find a living tradition in Judaism, whereas you do in Buddhism and Hinduism. Um, but I think now that we're living in Eretz Israel and there are people who are exploring that. One of the sources that I found recently, who's someone who's living now, is his name is Rav Itamar Schwartz,
hmm,
who wrote a number of books, but the one that's well known is Bilavavi Mishkan Evneh,
hmm.
um, which is a book about how to deepen one's spirituality. So he brings in one of his other books called Dad Nafshecha.
Hmm.
He brings a lot of Jewish practices, which I teach in my workshop.
Did he develop?
That's
Did they develop? Did he develop those himself, or because you're talking, R.A. Kaplan's making the argument that okay, there was this huge catastrophe, obviously, and a decision was made that's just not what's going to be emphasized. Is that his own development, or I mean, how would you describe what's coming from Rabbi Tamar?
um, I think what he's addressing is people who are learning about spirituality,
Mm,
and because there's a lot in the Torah about prayer and dveikut and in Hasidic writings especially. But he said, well, if you learn about something, that doesn't mean you've integrated it into your life and you're living it.
yeah.
And if you don't feel that, that God is right here with you in your everyday life, not just during prayer times or learning times, then there's something lacking. And I think he's addressing that disconnect of learning about spirituality, but not really uh, making it one's own. Um,
Mm,
so I think his practices are based on Torah sources,
mm,
and like he calls meditation hitbodedut, which is basically isolating yourself, and it's known in Breslev. Breslev talks about hitbodedut, and but their emphasis is on going to a place either outside or inside and being alone and talking to God, which is great. But I think what he says is that you have to do the work before that. Before you speak to God, you have to sort of align your mind and away from all the distractions and kind of have a clear mind. Um,
mm,
so though some of the practices that he talks about is to bring about that state of dveikut. So um,
mm, mm. What would you say, we're talking about mindfulness, and I guess maybe it might be helpful to the listeners at home to hear, well, what would you define mindfulness as being? I mean, mindfulness, there's meditation, there's different types of approaches. Maybe give everybody a bit of a background in exactly, how would you define these things in general?
yeah, well, I like to use John Kabat-Zinn's definition because he was I did take his course in mindfulness based stress reduction,
Mm,
and what he did was take the practice of meditation out of the religious context and make it and put it into the context of emotional well-being
Mm.
and being present in one's life. And he was working with people with chronic illness and people after surgery. He was using it in a medical, because he himself is a doctor,
Mm.
in a medical setting. But the way he defines it is paying attention. Mindfulness is paying attention in a specific way to what's happening in the present moment without judgment. And it's a very simple practice, a simple definition. But putting it into action is the challenge,
Mm.
because when we want to become present. Often, a person notices their mind is pulling them into the past, memories and reflections, maybe regrets, or projecting into the future, into fantasy or worry, and those are the two ways that we get pulled out of the present. The third way is judgment.
Mm.
If you're judging a person or a place or a thing as being good or bad, or right or wrong, you've already um, you don't see that person or that situation for what it is. You only see your judgment of it,
Mm.
and that clouds actually being present to what's really going on. Um, it happens a lot in say in marriage, where one of the spouses says something and I decide, that's wrong or that hurts, and then instead of being present to the other person, I'm already in my judgment of them as being wrong, and that takes me out of being present. So I would say the definition is just to be here and now.
Mm.
One of the ways that we do that is, say, closing your eyes and then following your breath. The breath is a very good anchor. We call it an anchor because it's always there. You
Yeah.
always, you can't go very long without breathing. And there's, the in breath, the out breath. So uh, this often that's what we use in mindfulness. We use an anchor, and then notice how the mind pulls you away from paying attention. Um, One of the judgments, especially for beginners, is that this is boring. This is not nothing's
Mm.
happening. I'm not learning anything new. I'm
Okay.
not doing anything. It's not productive. So they feel like it's a waste of time. So and what I usually say to them is that, okay, that's a judgment, and notice that, but don't stop the practice. Keep paying attention to the breath.
Mm.
And after, say, 10 or 20 minutes, usually the person notices something shifted, something changed. Some of that is based on physiology and actually a change in the speed of the brain.
Mm.
They have a way of measuring the speed of your thoughts, and it's measured in hertz. So the science is they've divided brain states into four levels. One is called beta. That's between 15 and 40 hertz. So if a person is very upset or very agitated, it would be
Yeah.
closer to 40. If they're in
Mm.
a relatively calm, everyday state of mind, that would be closer to 15.
Mm.
When you do mindfulness, you can slow it down to between 8 and 15.
Mm.
Closer to 8, you feel very relaxed and very calm and a kind of a quietness. And so there's a spectrum. So that change in the speed of the brain affects a lot of things. It affects your the hormones that are there's something called dopamine and serotonin. Those levels go up, and a person feels pleasure.
Mm,
Um, there's a lot of benefits. People with some states of mental illness have found that mindfulness can help, and they don't have to take psychological medication anymore.
mm,
And there's just a general benefit for physical and emotional health through this practice.
sure, sure. You know, it's interesting you were talking about with the dopaminergic system, um, and the influence that mindfulness has, say, on both, you know, anxiety and depression. You know, that both anxiety and depression are a certain expectation that a person has. You know, anxiety is an expectation of the feared future, you know, so to speak, and that, well, the dopaminergic system is a type of also expectancy. You know, the pleasure a person feels peaks right before they achieve their goal and then plummets as they achieve their goal. And so you know, it gets me
Mhm.
wondering in terms of mindfulness, you know, is that tapping into some sort of expectancy? And how well does that jive with the definition of, well, trying to stay in the present moment? It's very hard to expect. I mean, in what sense is a person expecting something in the present moment or anticipating the present moment?
Well, that is one of the not pitfalls, but one of the challenges, because
Mm,
after you experience mindfulness and fix the pleasure of it, the temptation is, well, I'm doing this to feel good,
mm,
and uh, so that's already sort of putting like you using it, uh, because the purpose of mindfulness is not to feel good, even though that
mm,
may be a result. The purpose is to be present. So if a person is going through, sometimes what happens, especially in retreats, which is something that I also lead retreats, which is a 2 day silent, where there's a lot of sitting and a lot
mm,
of introspection, and sometimes there can be what's called a brainstorm,
mm.
which is thoughts go very very quickly, and it might be unpleasant, and it might be, a person might say, well, if I'm not feeling good, why am I doing this? And then, because now it's become a dependency,
Okay, yeah.
I'll only do this if I feel good. So one of the challenges is that, well, I'm going to do the practice, I'm going to commit myself, whether I feel good or not, I'm going to continue, because the long-term benefit is that I'm going to be more present in my life, no matter what's going on. I mean, there's a one of the things that I teach is how to deal with pain. So pain, we don't try to do this practice to avoid pain, because pain is inevitable in life. What they say, pain is inevitable, suffering is optional.
Mm,
Suffering is when I make a judgment that I shouldn't feel pain. I don't want the pain. I try to pushing it away. But if you can experience physical pain, this is one of the things Dr. John Kabat-Zinn teaches his patients, that okay, you can feel pain, but if you take away the judgment, the degree of how you feel about it, it decreases,
mm,
because that judgment is that I shouldn't be feeling this and I don't want this, increases the feeling, the subjective experience of pain.
yeah.
And there's also something called emotional pain, which is sadness or grief or fear. And we say, well, like, just breathe through it, feel the fear, don't run away from it, but don't get swallowed up by it either.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the same thing with anger. You could feel anger. It doesn't mean you need to act on it, but it's important to feel it. Otherwise, you're stuffing your emotions, and doing that, usually it comes out in another way, either with depression or
Right.
explosion in
Well,
something inappropriate.
what I was going to say with depression, it's interesting that the you can predict. a person's level of depression in their writing, how many times a person's self-referential, how many times does a person use the word I, me, my, is a prediction of depression. That depression is a very extreme version of introspection. And mindfulness also kind of shares that introspective aspect to it, but it's very different and has the opposite
Hmm.
effect. It reduces depression as opposed to amplifies it.
Right.
How would you splice that difference in mindfulness? It is a type of introspection, but it's not leading to depression at all. It's doing the exact opposite.
Yeah. I've heard that that criticism that it's all, it's very selfish or self-centered, and it's all about me. And but my experience is actually, if you do pay attention to yourself. So let's say, and this is a practice that's, it's say 20, 30 minutes a day. And the rest of the day, I'm out
Hmm.
there interacting with people, working, learning, whatever. So it's not taking up all my time. I mean, people spend 20 minutes reading the newspaper. So
Right.
I mean, it's not, it's like investing in yourself so you can be a better person.
Mm.
Um, the other thing I would say about it is, when you sit down and do a mindfulness practice like breathing, or I can mention some other practices, that there's a distance from your thoughts. In
Mm.
other words, most people identify if they think I'm depressed, so that's how they identify themselves. I'm a depressed person. But if they can sit down and say, "Oh, my thoughts are, you know, uh, I'm thinking things that are bad, like I failed at this, I'm no good at that." Whatever the thoughts are, which are, making the person feel bad, but I have some distance from that, and they say, "Oh, that's what I'm thinking,"
Mm.
and maybe I have a choice. Maybe I can think something else. But the thoughts are not me. I am not my thoughts. I am the thinker of my thoughts.
Mm.
So there's a distance from, those depressive thoughts or the angry thoughts or fearful thoughts and me. A person's core is good. I think the Torah teaches that also. We
Mm.
are good people. And maybe, what we call the Yetzer Hara will pull us to do something that maybe is not good. But that would be our actions, but not who we are.
Yeah.
So I think that this practice really gets a person in touch with their core, who they are, and also a person's history. A lot of people have like traumatic family history, or whatever, in school, or being bullied, or whatever, being in a traffic accident, or
Mm.
losing a spouse, or whatever it is. Those are person's history, and they can get, you know victimized by their history, or they could say, okay, that happened to me, but that's not who I am. I'm in the Torah, we are Bnei Israel, we are children of God, and the soul is pure, is and our history can there are all kinds of things can happen to a person, but when you get touched with your core, which is the soul, then you can feel, oh, I'm more than my history. I'm more than my thoughts, and more than my emotions.
Yeah. Yeah. Kind of segueing a little bit, from this definition of mindfulness. So you have this training program coming up, a 4-week program. What would people have to expect coming into this program, and what can people hope to get out of it?
Okay. So the way I teach mindfulness is kind of from the outside in. Um, and what I mean by that is that we have a physical body. So we start with that. And there's something called body awareness,
Hmm.
which is basically, lying down, and I guide the the participants through being aware of different parts of the body, feeling it. And a lot of times people, it's the first time they ever did that,
Mm.
to be aware of their body. What's going on? Is there tension? Is there pain? Is there some kind of sensations? Um, from there, I go to movement. How do you move? Paying attention to how you walk. Um, and it's again a way of slowing down, uh, walking really slowly, paying attention to all the different movements that it takes to take a step. So that's also in the first week. That's what we're gonna be body awareness. In the second week, it's going to be using the senses of sight and hearing. Um, one of the things Rabbi Schwartz talks about is resonance. If you say, look at a candle. Now, a candle, it says, Ner Hashem Nishmat Adam, that the candle of God is the soul of man. So it's used as a metaphor for the soul.
Mm.
So if you look at a candle, it's held down by a wick and or oil or wax, and then there's the flame, and the flame is moving upwards. So and that resonates with the soul. The soul is the spiritual part of in our body that wants to connect upwards towards God. So there's a thing of like staring at the flame for a certain length of time, and that creates this resonance with the soul, and again that changes the speed of the brain and creates a connection
Mm.
of the soul, or connect to our soul through sight. And you can use any, sometimes you use the Hebrew letters or almost anything if you just focus on it.
Yeah.
And when you focus on it and you notice, oh, your mind is, wants to think about something else. This is, it's boring. There's nothing happening. It's just a flame. But again, when you stick with it, and then you notice there's a shift in how you feel
Mm.
in your consciousness. And you use the same with hearing. Usually I use a piece of music, which is a very meditative piece of music, and is again paying attention, using the sense of hearing for that sense to pay attention, using a sound to connect and to reach that state of mindfulness. That's the second week. The third week is speech, and that's where what they call in the East a mantra. So it's basically saying one word or a few words over and over again. And again, that is the same as it's something that's not it's not interesting in the sense of like reading a book or listening to a lecture where you have a whole series of ideas or a story. Now it's just a sound, and now we're using our own speech, and it's a very powerful thing. It's one of the most powerful practices that because we use speech, we use it in prayer, we use it in learning, but when we use it in this way, it's a way of connecting our deepest selves. The next practice is thinking. So that's the most people most know about. You sit down, you breathe, and you notice your thoughts. So that's when you observe your thinking. You don't get caught up in it, but you observe it, but then you keep coming back to the anchor. And in this case, it would be the breath. So so that's thinking. In the last week, we explore emotions and imagination. So this is a little bit different, because imagination, you can guide it. You can, with your eyes closed, you could say, imagine, a beautiful forest, and you're walking through the forest, and you meet a wise man, and you can, basically, it's a way of connecting with the unconscious. And our unconscious mind is connected to our soul. So that's what we explore in the fourth week, as well as what I mentioned before, dealing with pain. Um, and
Hmm.
in a mindful way. So that's pretty much what I would hope. And then after each class, I give homework, which is for the participants to get the most out of it. If they went home and every day until the next meeting would practice one of the things that I gave over, either body awareness or
Hmm.
using sight or hearing, and use that as a daily practice, that at the end of the 4 weeks, they had already established for themselves a practice that they can sit 10, 15 minutes in the beginning of the day or whenever is a good time for them. And then once they have their own practice, they're they can, can continue to reap the benefits and deepen their own spirituality.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
that's what I would hope
Okay.
the participants would
Yeah.
get out of it.
It sounds like it's a step process of going from the more physical to the more ethereal. And
That's right.
and I find it curious, like the judgment call you're making here is that emotions come after the intellect, which is very interesting. How did you decide to do that as opposed to the reverse? It kind of almost reminds me of like the dispute between the Rambam and the Kuzari in some sense, in terms of the goal of spirituality. Is that a part
Yeah.
of it or?
Well, there is an idea. I think I've seen it in the Tanya that moach shalita lalev
Mm,
betoldotam. Like how you think, the way you think affects how you feel. If you think, that person, wronged me or stole from me or cheated me or insulted me, and I'm going to get angry because of that thought. But if I think, oh, that person didn't mean it, or maybe they didn't mean to hurt me or whatever, then I won't feel angry. So a lot of times our thoughts create our emotions.
mm,
Maybe not always, but I think that's why I did it in that order. But it could be. It doesn't necessarily have to be. That's kind of the
mm,
way I learned it in John Kabat-Zinn's program of mindfulness-based stress reduction. He puts thoughts before emotions.
yeah, yeah,
So I just follow that model pretty
sure,
much.
yeah. Before we wrap up here, I wanted to like you mentioned briefly you also put on getaways. Could you speak a little bit more about that? When's your next getaway? What you guys do there?
Okay, so I haven't scheduled it yet. The last one I did was, think, not this past summer, but the summer before.
Mm,
It was right after Tisha B'av, so a lot of the yeshivas are off. A lot of people are on vacation. So uh, I've done this a number of times, but this was in a place called Masuot Yitzchak, which is in Gush Etzion, next to the Yishuv Bat Ayin,
mm,
and it's a quiet place, very pastoral. And basically, it was 2 days. People give in their phones before, so there's no distractions,
right,
which is not so easy.
right.
And basically, we did some of the same practices that I teach in the workshop, but it is a silent retreat in terms of there's no social talking.
Mm,
And the result of no social talking is that you hear the voice in your head very loudly, and you really notice your thoughts if you're
mm,
not distracted by talking to other people. Um, so basically, we sit. There's so alternative between sitting and walking, um, and some of the same practices of using sight, using hearing, using body awareness, and a lot of basically sitting and breathing and noticing the thoughts. And the result of doing that for a length of time is the practice gets deeper, and some issues that you may have not even noticed before, or memories, or even traumatic things might come up.
mm,
but when they come up, you're in a supportive environment. Um, and people think, if well, if I'm not talking to other people, what's there's no there's no connection. But really, there's a very deep connection when you're sitting in the same room and breathing the same air and supporting each other in the practice. It's an amazing thing. You wouldn't know it until you experienced it. Um, but it can be very profound,
Mm.
and um, there's we eat together, we sing together. We had a campfire where we all sang for a couple of hours. It was wonderful.
Wow.
And at the end, there's sharing. There is time, like during the day, each day, for personal sharing or questions.
Mm.
It's not
Mm.
like you're totally silent, but there's
Okay.
no like schmoozing. Um, and like I said, at the end, people share their experience. So it's a way to go deeper. I would say uh, some people dive right in that never done this before. I would say it's better to have some experience
Right.
ahead of time, but basically, it's a way to get away from your day to day life and really get in touch with yourself, and come back into your life sort of with a different perspective, or a renewed spiritual power.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it sounds like you're doing a lot of really beautiful work, and I hope you have a lot of success with your upcoming mindfulness training program. It sounds like it's a
Thank you
pretty
so
pretty
much.
decent, pretty decent, real decent program.
Yeah, yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks so
Thank
much
you,
for.
Jonathan.
Thank you. Thank you. It was really nice chatting with you today.